So, all right, so then 13 girls in the home, and then all kinds of people constantly at your gate, like constantly at the home, whether it's men, women, people who are sick, people who are homeless. Like, give us a glimpse of the kind of people that are constantly flooding into your home.
Right. So people in the community kind of jokingly, and my staff, they call my house Grand Central Station because, I mean, there's no telling who you'll find there. Someone who needs a glass of water, someone who needs a meal, someone who needs medical care, someone who just needs advice or prayer. I mean, short-term missionaries who are just dropping by because they want to sink into a couch and have a home-cooked meal with the family. And so it's been so awesome to expand my definition of adoption from like a legal process with children to just an accepting of people into our family. And a great example is a guy who's living with us right now. His name's Ray. And I guess I should preface that we moved about a year ago, and in the backyard of this house we moved into, there's like a cement block, and it has 4 little rooms in there. And I mean, they're just closet-sized, 4 cement wall square. And so I thought, like, what is this? Who has this in their backyard? And I didn't know, like, well, maybe we'll store stuff in there, but we don't, like, have a ton of stuff that we need storage room for. And so, of course, God has just used that to allow us to move even more people. We had previously had single women who had lived with us, or grandmothers who had lived with us, or children who needed a place to go short-term who had lived with us on like a temporary fostering basis. But this has allowed us to move some homeless families into this little house in the backyard. We're able to, McCarray's a guy, and so he needs to live in the house in the backyard. And so we're able to still live in community and have a little bit of separation for our family. But about 6 months ago, and maybe 8 now, McCarray, his house was burnt down by the community members of the slum community that he's living in. He's kind of the town drunk, and everyone is just kind of annoyed by his drunken antics. And so his house was burnt down, his leg caught on fire, and burnt his right calf, like pretty much to the bone. I mean, just, you think of a burn and you think that it would be pink, and just black. And so my social worker who works for Mazima was in the area and brought him to me and said, found this guy, don't know what to do. And I said, oh, me either. And so washed out his leg and wrapped it up real good in a bandage and took him to the hospital and said, is there, like, what do I even do about this? And they said, well, you know, he's probably just going to lose that leg, but if you'd like to try to prevent that, you need to bandage this leg every day. So I said, oh, okay. And so we tried to get him originally at that point to move into the house in the backyard, and he was just so entrenched in his addiction that he felt like he could not be away from alcohol. And so he kept wanting to go back to Missouri, where he didn't even have a home but was totally willing to sleep outside if he could just get his fix. And so I would send someone, or I would go myself to pick him up every day and bring him to my house and wash out his leg and rebandage this wound. And sometimes, though we would go and not be able to find him, he would have, you know, wandered somewhere or fallen asleep somewhere where we weren't unable to find him. And I'll never forget, on Easter Sunday, my social worker found him for me after about 4 days maybe of not bandaging this wound. And literally, like, I was in the backyard and he walked in the front gate and you could smell it. I mean, like, the whole yard just smelled like infection, which I don't know, a lot of you probably don't.
I'm getting queasy right now, but keep going, keep going. That's all right.
So I had, you know, I asked my kids, of course we were having everyone we know in the community over for Easter, and so I said to my 3 oldest, like, hey, I need you to help finish up dinner. And I just remember laying on my belly in the grass about this far away from his leg and tweezing these maggots out of this wound. And so at that point I said, like, it doesn't matter. You're going to throw up?
Yeah. I was queasy. Now I'm just sick. Just absolutely sick. But are there more maggots in the story?
Done.
Okay.
Done with
all right. That's good.
The rest
I just
of
want
the
to prepare
story is
myself
good.
physically. Okay, yeah, keep going, keep going.
The rest of the story is good.
Yeah, okay, that's
So,
good.
we move him into the house in the backyard, and he begins, like, detox, and he's very grouchy about detox. And But as he starts to get sober, every day, now I can do the bandage in about 10 minutes because the wound is this big. But when it was so deep, it was like a 30-minute process of just washing it out and bandaging it well. And so every day for about 30 minutes, McCary would tell me a little part of his story. And so it turns out that he's this really educated guy. He went halfway through university, and about halfway through, he found out that he had HIV, and his family just completely disowned him, wanted to have nothing to do with him after they found out his diagnosis. And so feeling like he had nowhere else to turn, he turned to alcohol, and that's when he started drinking, and his addiction began. And he had been just so kind of living in another world, in this drunken stupor, in the slum of Misesi, that he had no idea where any of his family was. Just had no one in the world. And on the day he was telling that part of the story, my 10-year-old Helen was in the sunroom, and she's especially fond of him. And she said, "Oh, we will be your family." And so we have been, and he's become part of ours. And I'll never forget the day when he was really quiet, and I was bandaging his wound, and he looked at me and he said, I think I'm out of stories. You tell me one." And so I just watched both of our tears fall on the tile floor there in my sunroom as I told him the story of Jesus and just what he had done in my life and what he wanted to do in McCary's life and what he had done for all of us. And my children were so excited by the opportunity to share Jesus with McCary that now, pretty much every day, as soon as homeschool is finished, you can find one or many of them in the backyard with Thrin's Bible, just sharing everything they know about Jesus with McCary. And he's become a great friend. He's happy, and he comes to church with us on Sunday. And sometimes if I'm out late at night, he'll wait by the gate to make sure that there's someone to open the gate for me when I get home. And so it's been, that's just one example of we've had so many people come in and out of our lives, but just cool to be able to see what God can do when we just open our doors.
I've never gone from so sick to so just erupting in my heart in praise in just a couple of minutes like that. So thank you for where that ended. So they don't just come to you, though. You and your girls go to them. So you've mentioned Misesi a couple different times. Tell us a little bit about that community and what you and your girls do there.
Yeah, Misesi is now one of my favorite places, which is funny because it's a place I was kind of scared of initially. There is a group called the Karamojong. They're a tribe from northern Uganda, and some of them have kind of migrated to town to try to look for a better life, but they're just marginalized and despised by other Ugandans. They're considered primitive and violent and dirty, and so they're just kind of all pushed into this little slum where really like the worst of their tribal culture and the worst of town city life is mixed together in a lot of prostitution, a lot of alcohol brewing, a lot of picking through scrap metal for livelihood. And the children are so starving because traditionally they find their livelihood in their cattle, but in this packed slum community they can't have cattle, and so they send their children to the streets to beg for food, to dig through trash for food. And so I found this community just by following some of these street children that I had become friends with, just following them home one day, and I was terrified. These are the people that even the people of Uganda will not be friends with, and because of that, they don't trust outsiders. No one's ever been kind to them, and so kind of a scary place for a little girl to be. But I began working there slowly, and I found out that there was a school nearby where the Karamojong are actually allowed by the government to attend for free, but they don't attend because they're so hungry that takes precedent. The priority has to be to go to the street and dig through trash for food. It can't be to go to school. And so I thought, well, I wonder if we got food back into these schools, if they would start coming to class. And so we started 2 days a week, now 5 days a week. We feed over 1,800 children at the School of Misesi. We've seen so many children come off the street and go back up to class because now they receive lunch at the end of that. And so that has been really neat, a cool way to see them stay in their community with their parents. While I was making friends with some of these children, I was meeting their mothers, and these were the women who were turning to prostitution or alcohol brewing or scrap metal picking or, other things that were just dangerous for them and harmful for their families. And so I began teaching a small group of them how to make this beaded jewelry that Amazima buys from them and we resell here in the United States. And the greatest part about the jewelry is that we pay the women, and so they're able to have enough money to provide for their families. They're able to put some in savings for their future. And then the extra profit that we get from selling the necklaces here at a higher price goes straight back into that feeding program that's in the same community. And so the women know that, and they are so excited and so proud that not only do they provide for their own children, they provide just for the nutrition of this entire community. And so that's one of our favorite places to go. My girls and I always go there and do ministry together, and the fear of necessity is completely gone. I mean, these people have become our close friends, and I can even just let my 3-year-old run, and I say, okay, go find your friends, and she runs around in the community, and people know us and know our family and would never let anything happen to my children. And so it's been neat to just form friendship with these people. We do Bible studies in the community, and my kids love to go there as well.
We were joking, because this is a slum community where, just rampant disease and all kinds of other things. But Katie was talking about, she's got 2 of her girls with her here while she's here, and she was talking about how when she sees them playing on the floor, she's like, oh no, there's germs, and it's, you let your kids play in the slum.
I do. My kids are the kids, good missionaries. They leave their kids at homeschool while they go to the slum, and my kids are the kids that have ringworm on their face because we've been playing with the homeless. But germs in the name of ministry are different than germs just for the sake of rolling on the floor.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So, maggots, ringworm now. So what I love too, so tell us about, and we see it all throughout Scripture, ministry of the orphan and the widow just coming together. So how has that happened in this slum community?
So many times the single mom has just as much need. Her children have just as much need as an orphan who's living with a different kind of relative. And so it's been neat to make friends with so many widows and watch them want to help their community, watch my children want to help them. And so one good example is Jaja Grace. She was this elderly widow. She really was only probably 55 or 60, but to look at her, you would have thought she was 80 or 90. Life had just been hard for her. Her husband had died of HIV. Her children had died of HIV. She thought maybe 1 or 2 of them were living, but they'd just completely abandoned her. She hadn't heard from them. And she lived in this little hut way on the edge of the community in the back. And I just remember it was always so dark and damp in there, and the roof leaked at night when it was raining. And she was so malnourished that she hadn't been able to walk in years, so she couldn't see, and so she was just back here alone. I don't even know how she was still alive by the time we got there, but she, without me knowing it, had just been praying to God, God, I believe in you, but life is too hard to believe in you. Could you send someone to help me? Could you send someone to be my friend? So I didn't know this as the women in my group were telling me one day, hey, we've heard there's this lady on the edge of the community that really needs help. We'd love to go visit her. Will you go and visit her? And so my kids and a couple friends, and we all trekked down there. And as I walked in, she said, God sent you to me. And I said, oh my gosh, that's great. And so we began a friendship, and we took her to the hospital where we found out she had HIV and TB. And my initial reaction was, okay, we're going to have to move her in with us, but she really didn't want to. She was old, and she just wanted to be in her own home. And so in talking to the women in this Beating Bible study group, I said, if I bring the food, can you kind of look out for her? And they were so excited. They were so excited to help this woman. So I provided just dry food and soap and some little packets of medicine, and 2 or 3 of them, there's 20 women, and so 2 or 3 of them would take a day, and they would go down and they would cook the food, they would do her laundry, they'd make sure she swallowed her pills. And so I think, wow, if there's anything better than helping your neighbor, it's enabling your neighbor to help their neighbor. And so it was really neat to watch all of us come together as friends just to care for this elderly widow in the community. And on Christmas Day, she slowly started to regain her sight just from having vitamins in her food. And on Christmas Day, we had gone to church, and then we went to kind of take church to her and have lunch with her. And she was able to actually stand up for the first time in years and walk around the outside of her small house for us. And so cool to watch God kind of give her strength and redeem her life in that. And several months later, it was apparent that she was kind of, as she was at the end of her life, it was time for her to go and be home with Jesus, and she was ready for that. She was ready. And so we thought we'd move her in with us. Her TB was actually communicable and at like a really contagious stage, and so we rented a little house just down the street from us where we moved her into. And it was so fun to watch my children. They were still going to like regular public school at that time, but they would come home from school and they would run inside and they would put on their little dentist masks, because they had told us like you can be with her, but you have to be like 10 feet away, and that wasn't going to work well for my family. And so we just wore little masks. They would run home from school and they would put on their mask, and they'd be so excited to run up to her house and just hang out with her and share stories about her day. And so by the time she died, we had moved her into a hospital, and we were able to be in the hospital with her the couple days before she died and just hear her be so excited to be going home to be with Jesus. And I was excited for her, and so we miss her, but I'm so thankful to know where she is, and I'm so thankful. She was one of the first people that was several years ago. She was one of the first people that just opened our lives to not just adopting children into our family, but adopting all kinds of different people into our family.
So is there such a thing as an average day in Katie Davis's life? So what might we expect if we were in your shoes? Like, what would a day look like in your life?
It can look like so many things. If it's not a day that we're out doing ministry in the village, I get up, I have a lot of coffee. It's like the theme of my trip here.
Yeah,
there's a lot of coffee. We have breakfast. We have the same thing every single day. We have bread with peanut butter. And then we all get on the couch and we do Bible time together, and for history, we study a different third world country, often one that doesn't have Christian influence in it, and we pray for that country and continue to study them throughout the week. And then we break into our different groups of math and spelling and whatever's going on, and my kids just know that like people will come and they will need help, and I will have to stop and go help them, and they're so flexible. They just keep right on doing their work, and occasionally they'll look up, "Hey, Mom, you okay? You need help? Okay, we're still doing our work."
Like help with some pretty significant things. So you mentioned sometimes people want a cup of water or somebody to pray with, but then there's also sometimes like people need an IV, and your kids, so what do?
Right, so so they run and get the IV kit.
And they help you fix an IV?
Right.
I'm just pointing that out because my 5-year-old and 3-year-old are not quite there yet.
Well, only the older kids are allowed to go, even in the closet where the medical stuff is. So we're talking like 13, 16-year-olds. Still, when I thought that I was going to go to college and be normal, I really wanted to be a nurse. And so I've been able to take some like emergency missionary classes. People come in, groups of doctors come in and teach like crash courses. And so I've also we do a clinic for the people of Misesi with some different registered nurses from Uganda. And so I just sit on the edge of my chair and watch everything that they do. And so several months ago is a great example. This woman came to our door, and she didn't come. Someone brought her. They were on the back of a motorcycle. Her friend was carrying her, and she was obviously in shock. I didn't know what from, but her eyes were rolled back in her head, and she was seizing and foaming at the mouth. And I thought, okay, we've got to get her in the car and take her to the hospital. But she's going to be dead by the time we get to the hospital if we don't get some fluid into her body. And so, that's one of those moments where kids are doing Wordly Wise or whatever they're doing, and and I say like, "Prosie, run in, get me all the things I need to run an IV," and she comes out and is holding the bag as we get this lady ready, and I jump in the car and take her to the hospital. where she was fine. She ended up being fine. I don't think I said that when I told the story this morning.
That's good.
She's
That's an
good.
important detail.
You know, and then I came home an hour later, and my kids are like, "Hey, Mom, how's that lady? Oh, we're done with math."
Just another day. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, I think you're helping us in a lot of ways to kind of de-romanticize stories that we have a tendency to romanticize. What would you say are maybe some of the biggest struggles that you face?
I think that, I mean, I've told you the story of Jaja Grace. I've told you the story of McCarray, and those are stories with good endings. The stories don't always have a good ending. I mean, we've had an alcoholic mother live in our home, and we have poured into her just hours and hours of our life and our family and our resources, and thought she was doing better, and then she would relapse, and we'd give her one more chance and think she was doing better, and she'd relapse, and finally just had to say, okay, you can't live here anymore. You know, this was getting dangerous for my family, and so she actually had to give her child up into a foster care situation with another foster family. You know, there are people who move in Muslim and leave Muslim. And so sometimes I get to see the fruit. Sometimes I only get to plant the seed. And I believe absolutely that God is sovereign and He will grow that to fruition in His own way. But I'm impatient. I want to see the fruit. And so it's, you know, it's discouraging. But for every story with a discouraging ending, there are so many stories with a good ending. And I think that I mean, also just that the need is so great that there's this woman on my porch who we can get the fluid in her and we can get her to the hospital so that she is okay, but 10 minutes away there's someone who was unable to get to the hospital for their medical care on time and they died. And I can feed this hungry person in front of me, but 10 minutes away there's a child who is starving to death. And so hard to reconcile. God is still good. God is still sovereign, and in that moment and with that person. And I think that He's just really confirmed for me over the course of the year, you be faithful in the little. You be obedient to the person that I put in front of you, and I will be faithful in the much. I will be faithful in the big. And so I mean, as a family and as a person, we just serve the one person or the two or the three people that He's putting in front of us for that day and just trust Him to take care of the rest. And He's been so faithful to multiply and multiply that. I mean, I see 13 little girls who love Jesus. I see people like McCarray who come into our lives and leave knowing Christ. I see 450 sponsored children who are learning to know Him, and I think of how their reach will be so much greater than mine. And so He's just been confirming that over and over again in my life, that I be faithful in the small and He'll be faithful in the big.
Do you think what you're doing is radical?
No. I think it's just what is natural and what comes from relationship with Jesus and an overflow of the love that He's given me in my life. And I think that what I'm doing is abnormal, but I don't think that it should be. And so people say, like, well, why do you do what you do? Or how do you do it? You do, but in light of what Christ has done for me, how could I not?
Okay, so this is the moment where I've prayed, we were praying this morning, that the story of what Christ has done in Katie Davis's life would then shift to this story that Christ is weaving in your life. So the same gospel that has saved her is the same gospel that saved you. The same Spirit who lives in her is the same Spirit who lives in you. What I love about what she just shared there, that it wasn't like one day, okay, I'm going to bring 14 girls into my home and I'm going to do this and that and have this minute. It was, I'm going to be faithful with what's in front of me that God has told me to do, and I'm going to trust Him to do. And so I just think in this room, like, what if we really, in just this room, we took God at His word? Because the gospel that is compelling her is compelling us. So you've got it in your notes. And I just want to put this. So this is key moment. So shift with me for a second. Like bring this into your seat. Because the same gospel that's compelling Katie Davis is the same gospel that's compelling all of us to simplify our living. So I'm not saying this will all look exactly like it's looked in Katie's life. But the Bible has told us all to be content with having necessities, right? So what does this look like for you? What does this need to look like for your family? For us, like, how can we get rid of the clutter in our lives that numbs our sensitivity to our need for God? We don't pray, give us this day our daily bread, because we have 12 choices for bread. So how can we be intentional? Paul says, be content with these things. To simplify your living, to increase your giving. So based on Katie's life, examples all throughout the New Testament, scriptural exhortations in the New Testament, I put 3 questions there. I would ask you, like, what is God leading you to share? So you have possessions, whether clothes or food, house. What is God leading you to share? Be generous and ready to share. It's a charge from 1 Timothy 6. What is God leading you to sell? Luke 12:33. Jesus says, sell your possessions and give to the needy. What is God leading you to sell? What is God leading you to share, to sell? What is God leading you to sacrifice? Now this is where we go from just giving because it feels good to giving to the point where it hurts. Sacrificial giving doesn't ask, how much can I keep? Sacrificial giving, how much can I give, even when it hurts? And obviously that will look different all across this room. Remember the widow's mite. I mean, she put in much less than everybody else, but she gave much more than everybody else. Extravagant, sacrificial giving. So it may be sacrifice for someone to give $25 in a way that it wouldn't be sacrificed for somebody to give $1 million. Somebody makes $10 million in the year. It's not much sacrifice to give away $9 million and think, well, I'm only going to live on $1 million this year. So that's an extreme example, but what would happen if we were giving sacrificially in this culture? But we as a church want to help one another think through how this looks in action in each of our lives. But regardless of what it looks like, the gospel demands the same thing from every one of us. And I use that word demands, and you heard Katie use it earlier. It sounds a bit forceful, but it's really only natural when you realize that He is the grave conquering King who has all authority over our lives. As a Christian, what it means is we've sacrificed the right to determine the direction of our lives. So the gospel demands, i.e. there's no other possibility. When you believe this gospel, the gospel demands a blank check from our lives with our possessions, with our plans, with our dreams. And the gospel demands a blank check today. Not tomorrow to dream about, but today. And so I want to call you to take this story from what is Christ doing in Katie Davis' life to what does Christ desire to do in my life.